Well, hello there. It's been a while. I don't think I need to tell you what season is rapidly approaching. Michigan, the drink of Wolverines everywhere. In the words of Jesus Christ, go blue. So, gosh, as soft as I said that, you'd think I was ex-candidate Joe Biden. The thing that I don't think he grasped was that what people were concerned about wasn't his age. I mean, basically, he and I are the same age. And it wasn't even his difficulties with some of his speech patterns, because he's a stutterer. It's that his voice had lost all of its energy. You can't sit down and give a rousing speech to people when you're saying, you should vote for me because I've been president for 3.5 years, and I really think I'm the one for the job. So you voted for me before, you should vote for me again now before I wake up. So he didn't speak with any energy. Can't say that about Kamala Harris. She's got energy. And I'll tell you, I still remember, I'm older than some of you. Most of you I'm not. You're a bunch of oldies, or you would be doing something worthwhile with your time. But my first president was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. First president I remember was Harry Truman. And then Eisenhower. And I was in Mexico during most of his administration, so I didn't remember him that well. But Nixon was his vice president. And when Nixon came out and announced he was nominated for president, and the Democrats, for some reason, chose this unknown, this Jack Kennedy that nobody had ever heard of, except in our family, because we watched when he sought the vice presidential nomination with Adlai Stevenson, which for some strange reason ended up going to Estes Kefauver, which is the best thing that could have happened to Kennedy. But along comes this unknown, this Kennedy guy that no one knew anything about. And just a little bit of family history for those of you in the family who may watch this someday after I'm long gone. My dad knew Jack Kennedy's older brother, Joe. They were both the same age. They both had been football stars in college. They both came from families of some prominence in their state. And they both joined this newly formed razzle-dazzle outfit called the Army Air Corps. Joe was a pilot, my dad was a bombardier navigator. Oh, and they were both Catholic and Irish. I forgot that. How could I forget that? That was the most important part. And they knew each other and got along. Then they separated, and I think Joe went up to Europe, and Dad stayed down went down to North Africa, where he then was the lead bombardier navigator in the bombing missions over Sicily, which is where he met Mom, who was in the Red Cross, and she was a French translator, and they were both stationed in Tunisia. So, enough about background. That's just for family members who might someday give a damn about your family. So, Jack Kennedy runs, and and in the polls initially out, he was way behind Richard Nixon, because everybody knew Richard Nixon, and Eisenhower had been a very popular president. Nixon was his vice president, and everybody thought the Democrats had just thrown this election away because they'd selected this Jack Kennedy fellow. What? Oh, I guess I will have a drink. Thank you. My dog just handed me this. Tastes just like a national championship. So, anyway, then things started happening, and Kennedy started inching up in the polls. And then they had the debate, and I got the biggest kick out of people saying, well, those people who listen to the debate on the radio, and they'll talk just like that, and listen to the debate on the radio, thought that Nixon won. The people who saw it on television, well, they thought Kennedy won. Meaning, the people saying this were meaning that, see, on substance it was Nixon, but Kennedy was good on charm. Hello. First place, they don't tell you what percentage of the people who listened to the debate on radio, what percentage they were of the total number of people who tuned in on the debate, either radio or television. They were a tiny, tiny fraction. 99% of the people who saw the debate saw it on television. So who cares what a few people who didn't have television sets thought of the debate? But that was the spin they were giving this thing. So out it came, and suddenly Kennedy surges. Not because of any substance. Nobody can remember a single thing anybody said. I'm the only one who can remember anything about that first debate. And the thing I remember is they asked both candidates, would you come to the military defense of Formosa? Not Formosa, that's Taiwan. That's Taiwan as Formosa. That was the original Spanish name for it, Formosa. I like that name. They should have kept that. Taiwan. What the hell? It sounds like something that somebody did the night before when they were in a bar. But it was the two islands that were just islands, and Taiwan had gun placements there to protect them against any sort of ship invasion from communist China. And so Quemoy and Matsu. See? Not that advanced. So Quemoy and Matsu. And most of you don't remember that, or don't even know what I'm talking about. But those are these two islands. And so the moderator asked both Kennedy and Nixon, would you come to the defense of Quemoy and Matsu if they were invaded by communist China? And Nixon said, absolutely I would. Why? We can't tolerate letting these communists da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Which he thought was a great talk. And the fact of the matter is he had never given 2 minutes of thought to that question, so he just popped out with the first thing. Well, here he was committing the United States to go to war with China if China should launch an attack on some little gun placement somewhere. So Kennedy came out and he said, the vice president knows full well that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs just issued a report that they had analyzed that situation, and it concluded that it would be impossible for the United States to defend those two islands, and it's not something we should seriously entertain. Boom! Wow, I remember that because that was like a slap in the face at Nixon, and you looked at him, and he looked like he'd been slapped in the face. He got you get that surprised look on his face, and he did that all through the debate. Like somebody said something, and I have no comeback. So after that debate, Kennedy moved up in the polls. He was still behind Nixon, but he suddenly people were talking about this young, good-looking Jack Kennedy fella who took it to Richard Nixon on the debates, and now he had great hair. And maybe it's a good thing he did die. Today he'd be bald, and they'd be talking about, remember when he had great hair? Yeah, I still do. I still got it. Yeah, and I had it colored the other day for those of you who are noticing. That's right. So now it's a mixture of black and gray. I think it looks quite good, but don't tell anybody. Fortunately, nobody watches the show, so my secret is still safe. So anyway, then the next big thing that happened was Kennedy went to rallies in Levittown. I think it was in Pennsylvania, which was one of these big housing things that were thrown up right after World War II so the GIs would have a place to live. And there was this massive outpouring. I forget, it was like 100,000 people or something. And they were just crazy for Kennedy. A lot of that's where they started the women screaming like he was Frank Sinatra. Someday I'll explain to who Frank Sinatra is, or was. So that's when this whole sort of Kennedy as a rock star began, which is kind of what we're seeing with Kamala Harris. That's when that began. And with that, he just went up and up and up and up and up. And he still barely won the election, and some people think to this day that it was stolen because of Illinois, and they may be right, I don't know. But he certainly was well on his way to a massive re-election, especially against poor old Barry Goldwater, whom incidentally I liked. Those days we could actually kind of like the Republican candidates. We liked Eisenhower, we liked Goldwater. We didn't much care for Nixon. But then as president, you saw more and more of Kennedy's personality, and you saw how he energized people, and he was throwing the football around the front lawn of the White House. Unfortunately, there was nobody there to catch it, so it kept rolling in the streets, and then they had a lot of cars running over the footballs, and then it sounded like a pop, and people thought that they were shooting at it. That's why they got careless. But I made that up. Don't listen. Don't believe anything I tell you. For crying out loud. So, but it was energetic, and he had this beautiful family and these wonderful kids. And then one time they had the Caroline's pony in the lawn of the White House, and he started eating Jack Kennedy's hair. He said, "I'm going to be the first president to go down in history as having been eaten by a pony." But it was just all that kind of fun and lively, and yet at the same time very substantive. And I don't want to go into all the things that Kennedy did, but so many of the things that he did, the main thing he did, which is with us today, which he didn't get a chance to sign into law because he was killed, but it was his bill, he introduced it, he pushed for it, and it was his, in my opinion, his crowning achievement over and above the Cuban Missile Crisis and all that sort of thing. This was Medicare. Now, those of you who are out there saying, well, I like the Republicans, think about it. The Republicans voted overwhelmingly against Medicare, and they vowed to kill it in the Senate until Kennedy was shot. If it wasn't for Kennedy, you wouldn't be having Medicare today, and I know that all of you old people, like I, use it. So that was, to me, his crowning achievement. But he had all kinds of substantive things that were in there. The space program, he brought that from where it was abysmal. We used to have these rocket ships going off every day, and we'd watch them, and they'd rise, and they'd rise, and they'd rise, and then they go and blow up. And that was our space program. He energized that program. He supported NASA, and I remember he kept saying NASA, 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 and we thought he was talking about Nasser, who was then president of Egypt. But no, he was talking about NASA, which we now know was the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. See how that rolled right off my tongue, and I'm almost 80. Yeah, that's right. In another 20 years, I'll be 80. 25 years. Yeah, that's right. My age, you have trouble with math. So, that was Kennedy, and he brought that energy to bear, and I'm seeing it now with Kamala Harris, and it's something that Donald Trump can't match. He gets that from his MAGA people because they think he's funny, and he says outrageous things, a lot of them tongue-in-cheek. The news media takes them as serious, but they're tongue-in-cheek. And they love it. But he has no real star power. He just has obnoxious power. So that obnoxious power appears to people who like obnoxiousness. And those are his MAGA base, or as Hillary Clinton referred to them as the deplorables. And this one, I'm sorry I taught one, because I get things, that pops into my head, and that causes me to think about something else. But the deplorables, they say, well, look, see, that was a big mistake she made, because she called them deplorables. The ones she was calling deplorables were the people that were voting for Trump. That's how she identified them. So do you think her calling them deplorables caused them to, switch from Hillary to voting for Trump? Okay, so I'm going to talk about another thing that irritates me. And one thing I try to do with this show, basically for my own benefit, is when I hear things on the media, I don't repeat them. Okay, if you hear some talking head on Fox, and I watch all these Fox or CNN, say something, I'm not going to come out here and tell you something I heard. What I talk about are things that you didn't hear, or things that were wrong with the things that you did hear. And here was one, it was a segment on one of these shows, and they were talking about the fact that this Reading, they talk about a couple of areas in Pennsylvania who were becoming heavily Hispanic, and yet, surprisingly, their voting patterns were shifting from Democrat to Republican. And one of the ones they picked up was Reading, Pennsylvania. And here's what they say. Here's the data that they gave you in this show. And I'm a data person, right? Because I was a physicist, and I'm a lawyer, and data meaning, what does the evidence really show here? That matters to me, and I'm pretty good at that. So the data they point out was the increase in the Spanish population in Reading, and they did it for these other couple of towns too, has exploded. It's gone from like 5% to like 70%. I'm making those numbers up. It's some huge change in the number of Hispanics. And yet at the same period of time, those areas are now voting, not a substantial majority, but a majority are now voting Republican in those areas. These are now Republican areas at a time, look, and they were talking about the last election that Biden carried Pennsylvania, and yet Reading et al. Voted Republican. So the thesis of this little presentation was, I know what you're thinking. I'm smiling because there's booze in this. Well, of course there's booze in this thing. I'm not only a Michigan grad, I'm also Irish. Hello! Man, that's good. Whoa! Okay, there's no booze in that, but I'm just funning you. Come on, calm down, relax, okay? God. Ever since you people joined Alcoholics Anonymous, you've been intolerable. So, the premise that they then pushed with this thing is, so the Democrats are in trouble because they're in trouble with the Hispanic community because the Hispanics are switching from being solidly behind the Democrats to voting Republican. Now, what's fundamentally wrong about that? This was their thesis of this program. It was on CNN, I think it was on one of the major networks. They talked about the number of Hispanics that were moving there. They said nothing about how many of those Hispanics were eligible to vote. Now, you and I both know that a substantial percentage of those Hispanics that have moved into Reading, Pennsylvania are here illegally. And the rest of them are here legally, but they're seeking asylum, which means they're not American citizens, they're not eligible to vote, and that's why the 75% of the population that's Hispanic is not voting Democratic, because they're not allowed to vote at all. And the rest of them are madder than hell about this influx of these Latinos, Spanish-speaking people, many of them Catholics, who have come in and just flooded into their small towns and changed the cultural outlook of their city. So now they think I'm living in Mexico. I go to all the signs are in Spanish and the shops are selling tortillas and enchiladas and guacamole and Mexican music is coming out on the 16th of September. Well, Mexican music comes out everywhere on the 16th of September. Or the 16 de septiembre, como digamos. Don't forget, I was raised in Mexico. So, these people are madder than hell about the Mexicans being there, and that's why they're voting Republican. So the voters in those towns have not changed from being Hispanic supporters of the Democrats. They have gone to being more interested and motivated to vote Republican because it's an anti-Latino vote. Now that's the truth. But they didn't say that because it makes a better story. And that's what gets me so upset about these stupid programs where they're always looking for the story. It's more dramatic to say that these Latinos have switched from supporting Democrats to supporting Republicans. What are the Democrats going to do about that? It's not dramatic to say all those Latinos in there are either illegals or they're here as seeking asylum and they're not eligible to vote. And the eligible population is more and more Republican and more angry about the presence of all these Latinos. That's the real story, but they didn't tell that because they wanted to tell the dramatic story. And now I have given you my dramatic response to that so-called dramatic story. And so that's it. I'm getting out of here. Goodbye.